Thank you. Colleagues, if you attended our previous seminar, maybe you'll remember that I told you at that time that despite the fact that the ITU gives out certain frequency assignments to its members for use within one's territory, it's a protected resource. It doesn't have any deadlines. It is easier to coordinate. These frequencies, such frequency allocations are very rarely used by national administrations, even when countries want to implement their own satellite programs. Being aware of this problem, which lies in the fact that traditional, conventional technological solutions, which existed just several years ago, did not allow us to efficiently use national allotments offer services within one's national market. Being aware of this problem, several times ago, we started cooperating with Saturn satellite networks, which offers a new solution, light geostationary satellites dubbed Nationsat, which are optimized exactly for use under national domestic satellite programs, which are focused on serving national markets and which are very efficient from the economic viewpoint. Nationsat supports not only telecommunications, but also elements of remote sensing. Some time ago, we discussed with one national administration plans or an option of adding remote sensing equipment to a telecommunication Nationsat satellite. This is possible. Nationsat satellites may be either conventional satellites or HTS satellites with multi-beam antenna systems. The key difference between Nationsat and other satellites is the digital payload, which is flexible and which can be reconfigured in orbit with flexible software after the launch, as agreed with between Saturn and Intersputnik. Nationsat satellites can be offered to interested administrations or national operators, both for for sale or for lifetime lease. Nationsat differs from conventional satellites. The conventional satellites are heavier and larger. Nationsat satellites use standard mass-produced parts, elements, and mainly it is adjusted to the requirements of a customer in orbit, flexibly using software, which helps us avoid extra costs. This helps us reduce the price of a standard Nationsat satellite from $20 million as like that of a traditional satellite to 70 million or less in orbit, including launch and insurance. Nationsat satellites are tailored to cover national territories or local markets rather than wide or broad coverage areas or footprints. We see that many national operators are experiencing difficulty in selling capacity. Competition is very hard, and new operators, it is hard, it is difficult for new operators to enter local national markets. So conventional satellites proved to be effective only in most populated countries, or in the case of established international satellite operators. Next slide, please. Today, the two options are offered. The first one is a conventional Nationsat satellite. The other one is an HTS, the HTS Nationsat version. Both use flexible payload. Even the conventional satellite uses a digital processor which shapes its frequency plan and helps dynamically change center frequencies and so on and so forth. After the launch, choose operating frequencies, switch between the segments of the working frequency band from C to KU to KA in planned and unplanned frequency bands. This makes it possible to perfectly implement national frequency allocations and make use of the rights that the ITU gives to national administrations within the framework of the plan of FSS and BSS services. The HTS satellite has a digital device which flexibly shapes beams. Apart from frequency flexibility, it has coverage area flexibility within a given satellite coverage area. There are multiple spot beams that can be redirected and that can have different coverage, each of them. So it's maximally flexible, meeting the demand that may vary, that may change geographically. Both versions of the satellite are light satellites, and multiple launches are possible in both cases. Next slide, please. A conventional Nationsat satellite is perfect to make use of a national allotment and a perfect satellite for a national program. The satellite, as I said, costs less, much less, down to $70 million, including the launch, including insurance, control and monitoring equipment, and personnel training. Such satellite will help you make use of all of your national allotments. The total bandwidth exceeds 1,600 megahertz, available under the FSS national allotment and CNKU. The delivery time is about 15 months. The satellite may include payload capable of bringing into use KA band assignments, which might be interesting from the viewpoint of further development of our country's spectrum resource. There are several financing options. Debt financing with 3% upfront payment is possible. Repayment within 5 to 7 years after the launch, as soon as the satellite starts bringing money, bringing cash. So given the base price of $70 million, the cost per megahertz per month of service is less than $250 or below $100 for 1.2 meter Earth stations. Next slide, please. The flexibility which Nationsat brings makes it possible to use such satellites as an important tool for the long-term development of a country's spectrum resource outside a national allotment. This slide shows the approach that can be used in this case. If you launch a Nationsat to use a national allotment, start working with the planned frequencies, Then you file additional frequencies outside your planned frequencies, coordinate your new frequencies. If you are successful, frequencies that have been coordinated can be brought into use immediately on the satellite, which is already in orbit and which is flexible in terms of its frequency plan. After that, given the deadline and the ITU regulations, it has already been met. The operator will have enough time to plan the manufacture of another Nationsat satellite to the orbital position, thus developing or expanding the use of its spectrum resource. Intersputnik is prepared to provide all required support, prepare ITU filings, provide consultations with respect to frequency coordination, and so on and so forth. I have to point out that at this point in time, we are cooperate with the Bangladeshi National Administration. Their first national satellite uses Intersputnik spectrum resource, and we help Bangladesh in the international frequency coordination of their frequency assignments. And this is an example of what we can do to help you. Next slide, please. This slide shows the theoretical capabilities of an HTS Nationsat satellite with a digital beam shaping device. This technology makes it possible to shape more than 600 micro spot beams, each of which can be reconfigured depending on requirements. Given the if your spectrum resource is sufficient, you will be able to transmit up to 80 gigabit, but if you have the required frequency resource. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Regardless of the version of the Nationsat, of any Nationsat satellite, there are two launch options. Either it is a GTO launch with electric propulsion. It takes 4 months for a satellite to be brought into use. Also, direct GSO injection can be used, electric propulsion, for station keeping, and it will take about 2 months to place the satellite in service. This is an interesting thing because the platform of the Nationsat satellites is modular, and one can flexibly change the configuration, the physical configuration of the satellite. So multiple launches are possible using a single rocket, a single launch vehicle. So depending on the class of the launch vehicle, you can launch several satellites. Next slide. In cooperation with Saturn Satellite Networks, we have prepared several options for Intersputnik's participation in the use of Nationsat satellites. One of the options is that Intersputnik can act as a prime as an integrated prime supplier of a package solution. We can procure a satellite, build a ground segment. We can provide consultations with respect to frequency assignments as a separate service. We can offer this to all kinds of customers, both member countries and non-member countries. One can either buy or lease for life a Nationsat satellite whatever you prefer, considering that Intersputnik is service is a service provider using the capacity of our partners. We are prepared to sign a marketing agreement with national operators to support sales of capacity of their satellites after the satellites are launched into orbit. Next slide, please. Thank you for listening. We are open to any comments, questions, and can provide any further details that you might require. Thank you very much.